Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about using a logic model for your study. And so we're going to talk about what is a logic model and when do you use them. And then we do have a active learning where you're going to work on one for your project. Anyway, so what is a logic model? How many of you have used a logic model before? Yeah. Okay.
Maybe you should be, how many of you have heard of a logic
model?
model?
Oh, sorry. How many of you have heard of a logic? How many of you have heard of a logic model before?
See, that's your built-in bias.
I know, my built-in bias. Darn it! Not being culturally relevant. That's great. Okay, so here's what it is. It presents a picture of how your effort is supposed to work. And the thing that I like about a logic model is it makes you identify the logic in what you're doing and why you're doing it. And so sometimes when you go through this process, you realize, ooh, that's a step too far, or that's an assumption that I'm making that isn't there. Or sometimes if you're working with a community partner, their logic may not make a lot of sense to you. And so if you go through the process of this, it makes it easier to identify those missteps or those gaps, really, is kind of the purpose. It forces us to clarify our logic for our expected changes or our predictions. It's not an exact representation of everything in the project, but you can get a lot of information in a logic model. And then it lets us all be clear about the goal that we're working towards. And I think Yolanda and KT both talked about that, right? So being clear about what is it that we're all doing together. When you create a logic model, you can work really in kind of two different approaches. So we can think about moving forward from the activities or moving backward from the goal, if you will. And I have some examples I'm going to pass out to you so you can take a look at those. But you can either start with your activities and then figure out how your activities connect with the impacts or the outcomes that you want to have, or you can go in the opposite direction. You can start with the impacts that you want to have or the outcomes, and then you can work backwards. What activities do we need to carry out to get us to that point? So you can work in either direction that works for you. And so this is not really about organizing your study. It is about working through the process of what you're doing and why you're doing it. What are you trying to get into in the end, right? Or how do those activities help you to get to whatever that end goal is? So those are the two approaches. When can you use a logic model? And so you can use it in a lot of different time periods. So if you're planning a project, if you're implementing a project, if you're working with stakeholders to try to develop a project together, if you're evaluating some kind of program, you can use it then, or having some kind of advocacy, right? So if you're looking for funding, something like that. And these are how you would use it in all these different time settings. So, if you're planning a project, you can think about aligning your efforts with those of your community partner. You can think about what are the necessary partnerships. So if there's some activities that you're trying to carry out, then you may find that there's another person that you're missing that helps you get the resources and materials you need to carry out those activities. Implementation as well, so when you're actually carrying it out, helps you to think about like mid-course adjustments. Okay, so what we're doing isn't working. Let's take a look at the logic again and let's see where we can make some adjustments. And then our stakeholders figuring out what their logic looks like and what they're bringing to the table in that negotiation piece as well. And then explaining how the overall program works. And sometimes, I think you've all already experienced this, sometimes it's very difficult to articulate what you're doing and why you're doing it and to what end. And so this helps to be able to articulate that. Evaluation, telling the story of the program, preparing some kind of reports, if you will. So if you're thinking about a community report or something that has more of an academic focus, you can use it. And then, of course, advocacy we talked about. So if you're thinking about funding or something like that, this can help you. So what we're going to do, I'm going to share with you some examples. What I would like to tell you, though, is if you go and look up logic model, you're going to see all different types. They don't all look the same, but they do have some components that are similar, okay? So the ones I'm going to share with you are all going to look very different. And then I have one that was created for EOSA specifically, and we'll look at that one as well. So that would be the one I would encourage you to use. But ultimately what we're going to do is try to work through your project using a logic model. So that's what we're going to do. Let me share these with you. And some of these may be posted. So what I'm going to do, there's a great article, it's posted on Blackboard for you. These are some examples of logic models. You dance over here. And you can pass these around, so they're all different. So there's like, I don't know, 8 or 10 examples, and I've just given you a couple so you can see how varied they are. There's one. There's one too. We may have to pass them so that way you can see more than one. Anyway, so you can see, especially if you have more than one example, what are the components of these models. And so you should see a couple things. You should see something that looks like a goal or a statement of the problem. Whether you're looking at one design or another, you should see something that represents that. You probably see something that asks maybe about resources and activities or inputs. Then you're going to see something that's outputs, maybe outcomes. You may have language that says impact, something like that. All those pieces. And you may want to take a look and read through, and then maybe we all pass to the right at least once, so that way you get another example before we move on to this other one.
Have we passed?
Yeah, pass to the right. Pass to the right. Pass to the right.
Okay, are we?
Yeah, pass to the right, and then I'll share these over. Yeah, we just wrote a couple of models in my class. Mm-hmm.
That's my level.
Something I
See, does anyone else have the promoting smoking cessation on?
Yeah, I had that at first.
Is it me? I can't read what's in the boxes.
That's
Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
There's gonna be another one that you can read. It's fine.
Okay.
There's lots of, yeah.
Is something faded or something?
You are right, absolutely. I don't care much. Some of them.
Oh, yeah.
It's hard to see.
I think we're supposed to, she was saying to the right.
Who's got you?
Oh, okay. I was like, my vision is really going the past year or so.
Oh, back to you.
must have been messed up, probably.
I can grab it with you in front of you. Because you're.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, there's so much information. I don't really know
I know.
how much I absorb. Like
I see like diagrams like this too, and I'm just like,
right.
can't read it.
They're very like.
I know.
I'm not
Because
gonna
you don't
lie.
really know the content. It's just a bunch of boxes and the arrows.
Yes, but you're about to create your own, and then you're gonna love them. Maybe
I've never been.
Like a project map?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Well, I
you,
saw the kids one, I like that one.
the kids one is nice,
Yeah.
isn't it? Yeah. It's easy.
Yeah. This is clear.
They know what they want.
know that it's so fancy. The shape, the way it looks, it's kind of like making a. Wow.
That one, yeah, that was
Yeah,
very
that's
different,
circle
isn't
and
it?
with
Uh-huh.
I don't know.
No, that was interesting. Okay, so those are just some examples, because what I want you to do is to see the consistent pieces in there more so than the shape or how many or what line is pointing to another. It can take whatever form. So, okay, so now I'm going to give you 3 documents. The first one is an example. Beth Feldy did this example. And so we'll look through that, okay, together. So it's an example 1. Then the second page is blank for you. And this is the logic model that you're going to work on. You're going to fill this in, okay? And then the third is an article, and the name of the article is Tearless Logic Model. So how to make it without bringing yourself to tears. So this may be a good one. Anyway, the good thing about it is it breaks down if you're going to do this with a community partner or yourself, what are the steps? And it just covers the basics of the information that you want to put in here. So let me pass these out, and then we'll look at the example logic model from Beth together, and then you're going to start working on drafting your own.
That's about
Sure. Or you can
think
do
about it. I understand that.
Yeah, I have to revise and submit on our logic model for the dot one. Do you? That's fantastic. Maybe you should bring that in as an example.
Let me get the most recent draft,
Okay.
because I would think I'm looking at it now.
Here's that. I have that together. There you go.
Okay, keep this.
Yep.
Model, resources,
Mhm.
I think mine, I'm gonna implement that the reverse one, because I know what I want to do eventually.
Yep.
And then what
Then you
take
can
is
work
it
backwards,
to
yep.
get that point. I just kind of have to think it backwards.
Yep.
It's a snow delivery. You don't know.
Okay.
What do you
So,
want?
I don't know what this room is. This is not my project. This is Beth Valdy's project. Beth is a occupational therapist, and that was her, or OT is her field, her discipline. So she developed this, and I sat down and thought, I'm going to look all these terms up, and then I thought, no, it doesn't matter because it really illustrates the point more so than the specific things that are in here in terms of how to use the logic model. So let's look through this one together. So let's look through her example. The one thing that I will say here, it is focused, the question up top is the guiding question, which is what do you want to know ultimately? And that may be a piece of your goal, right? You may also think about the impacts as your goal. So if you think about what do you want to have happen, that may be your impact. Or what is it that you're trying to gain? What kind of knowledge are you trying to gain? That could be what do you want to know. But ultimately, think about that as a pretty simple statement, what you're trying to figure out. What data do you need? So this is in here because, again, in EOSA, we want your project to be a research-focused project. So we want to know what data. So in order to answer that question, what do you need in order to do that?
So you ask that in the protocol, in the research protocol, I think the number 1 or number 2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, what data you, yeah.
What, yeah, definitely. Okay, so let's look at resources. These can be physical, financial, human, natural, or other resources. So you can see here Beth has listed out she needs 2 ECU faculty, she needs 2 OT grad students, she needs access to this room, an audio recorder, she needs somebody to do transcription work, she needs transportation to Kinston, a camera, monthly meetings with the research team, etc. So those are all pretty easy to understand. What are the things that she needs to make all this happen? The activities, major activities necessary to plan, implement, and evaluate the project. And then you really do want to list who's responsible, especially as you really develop your project with your community partner, so that way everyone knows, okay, the community partner is going to do this thing, or I'm going to do that thing. So again, those clear boundaries as you're negotiating. So develop and implement the memorandum of partnership, develop research protocol, timeline with the team, IRB approval. All these things could be on yours as well, right? You're all going to do these same pieces. But then specifically she talks about conducting interviews and observations with field notes, transcribe the interviews, develop a literature review, and so you can see these are going to correspond to whatever data that she's collecting for this project. Outputs, measurable, readily determined products resulting from input of resources and activities. So for outputs, and then she did, divided them into community and academic, because again, we want to ensure that in the partnership, the community has whatever it is they need, right? What is that deliverable, but that you also do. So that's why both of those pieces are in there, so that way they're explicit. So description of the usage of this particular room, description of staff satisfaction with this, and they felt like that this would give them some basis for a grant, so some language they could use, that the community could use. And as KT was talking about, right, at some point, if the grants were to go through the university, it doesn't make sense for the community partner. So what is the deliverable for the community partner? Maybe it's that language that they can use when they go seek funding on their own. All right, academic, new knowledge pertaining to persons with severe and profound intellectual disability, educate ECU students and develop new skill sets, and then publications and presentations. So what are those deliverables? Then we get into outcomes versus impact, and the way that this is defined here is the effect produced by the project, and then something that is indirect effect. So it's long-term and it's less focused, if you will. So community policy development, change in scheduling, increase availability of this room to these residents in terms of academia, OT protocols for students that are wishing to use this, so they have some kind of access, and then impact is for the Caswell residents and staff, availability of this facility to Kinston, and enhanced quality of life overall. So you can see those. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I say something? You know, when I'm thinking the impacts, linking back to what it is you want to know, the cultural impact. So this impact doesn't really measure whatever the cultural change is that you want. So I would see adding some more cultural outcomes in this logic model to link back to the objective.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's fair. Yep.
Well, I have trouble understanding the difference between long-term outcomes and impacts. Under they are the same thing.
Outcomes and impacts. So you actually will find them defined in different ways depending on which reading you're doing. But in this model, the way this one is done, you think of outcomes as being specific to the people that are participating, if you will. And then you think of impact as indirect for those, maybe they didn't participate but they live in the community. So if you have, I'm trying to think of an example. So maybe through your project, there's some kind of engineering project that happens within a particular house, I don't know. But within the community, there may be an impact from that through those who are indirectly affected by it. So one is direct and one is indirect.
Okay. Help. Yeah.
But I do think it's fair that if we ask a question about cultural impact, do we see that anywhere in the model? And so we would expect to see that over here in terms of long-term, right? These impacts. So enhanced quality of life may be the biggest connector between those, but it could probably be a bit more specific in terms of cultural impact. A couple of things here. Do you have any assumptions specifically regarding those resources and how you're going to gain maybe access to those? And then are there any other factors that are going to impact those activities or any of the outcomes? So for example, I think I've used this one before, but there were EOSA faculty members that went through EOSA in last year's cohort, and they were working with the sheriff's office, and because it was an election year, a lot of that work had to kind of stop because people didn't know what position they were going to be in. And then once all the elections happened, then partnerships kind of redeveloped because people were still in their current job or not in their current job, that kind of thing. So those would be external factors. It impacted how quickly their study moved. It had an impact on whether or not they could collect data. So they had one plan that was to have 4 sessions over the semester, and by the end of the semester they had 1. And those are just factors that were beyond their control. So if you can think of anything external that may have an effect or an impact on your activities, etc. If you look on the back, the one thing that that Beth did is try to take some of those outcomes and let's think about where they fit in terms of economic development, or are we talking about maybe access in terms of health, the environment, quality of life, etc. So we can think about our outcomes in these big categories, if you will. And so this kind of gets specific. So you don't have to get this specific yet, but if you can think about this piece. So what you should be able to see through your logic model is if I have these resources, I can carry out these activities, which will allow me to have specific deliverables. And from those deliverables, these will be the outcomes for those specific people participating. And then broader than that, this other group of people or those in periphery may have some kind of indirect impact, effect. So it should make sense. They should all link together. Or you can work from the opposite direction if you like. The other thing I would encourage you to do is take a look at the article, and on the 3rd page it starts with step 1, right? So if you're working in the opposite direction, if you're starting with the end in mind, here are some questions that you might think about. And then when you talk about, who do we serve, here's some questions you may want to answer. So this article is a good way to help you fill out the model. So you can kind of think about those questions and go from there.
Have you looked at this visual guide with Prezi? This link right here?
I haven't.
Okay.
Second please.
And on the article, it has, if you want to,
Yes, I saw
if you want to see this visual guide of creating.
Yeah, the Prezi,
Yeah, it's Prezi.
logic model.
Mhm. So we have about 15 or 20 minutes for you all to use the article to help you start to draft your logic model based on what you understand your project to be currently. I know that they are developing and changing.
Using this article,
So you can use this. So for example, if you go to the 3rd page and it says step 1, and under step 1 it gives you some questions that you can think about, and that would help you to fill in the impact of your study.
you can write here, right? On this product.
And then if you go to this article, like step 6 is activities. And so if you want to read through those questions, it will help you to think about the activities that you want to carry out for your project.
So I have a question, but it's kind of specific to maybe my project. Should I talk quietly to you, or should I? I feel like I'm wrapping my head around 2 starting points. I have the guiding question of how can a design inclusive model, or integrating a design inclusive model, create a stronger sense of place for community and have more impact, essentially, which is my research question. And then there's the project within the project, which is designing an intervention in the community. And I may be kind of thinking, this is because they're happening simultaneously and rely on each other. I get confused on which one is the question to do for something like this, where I guess that question would be a question for the community partner, and what's the need that the community has as far as creating a design intervention, and how can a design intervention create an inclusive, maybe it's interactive experience for the Uptown Greenville community, which would be residents, visitors of the area, employees, employers, that participant group. Maybe start with both those questions?
So I would suggest that you start with the broader question. So thinking about how do you develop a stronger sense of place, right? That kind of first question. Because I think your other question is going to fall into that. So the intervention in and of itself is going to have its own, and you could even like nest them, right? So that you could have the intervention have its own logic model. But that may be an activity in your bigger picture.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. I think maybe in my own thinking process, I'm still trying to wrap my head around that, but even just saying that out loud to you is helpful. Okay. Yeah. I'm going to start there. Thank you.
We're getting pretty close to time. Does anybody want to share what you think? Anybody?
Yeah.
Fine? Yeah.
Can we discuss? I want to straightforward so I can discuss. I'm starting with the first one. Anticipated impacts. If you have really got it right, what would it look like in 10 to, what would it look like 10 to 20 years? So since my, the research or the project model is that when this, it will be implemented, this project, we are thinking that more outside businesses will come here, and by that, the economic performance of the Eastern North Carolina will be improved. And if our organizations were operating at our very best, I mean the ECU, at that time, in those businesses, our faculty will be able to do research, and our more students will be employed. And in addition, actually they might bring some new technology. Those technology will create impact in the university. University's research direction may also change. So this is the first one. Second one is target population, those those we serve. Who do you serve or help? Through this project, in fact, from my side, if you consider academic researcher, actually it will serve the university in every way, the research, employment to our students, and even in our curriculum development, because the technology they are going to bring, if it is a new, we need to develop new curriculum so that we can teach that. And from my partner side, actually, he will be serving community anyways. The community will get more jobs. All the classes, in fact, here, actually, the general labor, skilled technician, and community college based, the person who are coming out, they can get the new jobs or better jobs. So who benefits from the community is almost all classes comes into the picture, because a new industry is coming up with their jobs, with their expansion, with their business. And who are you ultimately trying to serve? Actually, it's ultimately the Eastern North Carolina and our students. And these are the two ultimate target. And both of them, I think, will be greatly served if the project we can make it successful, I don't know.
So wait before you move on. Who else wants to share maybe what they answered for number one, which is that impact question? That if we got it right, what would it look like in Tenda? I think that's an interesting way to think about impact.
Yes.
Anybody? It's challenging to answer that question.
I had put, I don't know if this is, if it's even worded right, but increasing the stability of the relationships of Hispanic families for the well-being of children and adults.
Mhm.
Because I see that as the larger, I can't do this now, but I'm
Yeah.
hoping that through this.
moves
okay.
forward. Yeah. Very
So,
good. Yeah, yeah, I think so. Yeah, that kind of long-term, big picture. Yeah. Anybody else? No.
Good try.
Sure, shoot.
So I thought one of the big impacts, and I don't know, it's not really measurable, but fear reduction,
Mhm.
and then the ability of affected community members to implement risk reduction strategies.
Very good.
But I don't know if those are really measurable with the types of data that I'll be collecting.
That's measurable.
Are you less scared today than you were?
No, I.
Are you more scared now?
Yeah, you just gotta talk to people.
Well, so that would be a step beyond what we're doing, or whatever comes
Yeah.
for this initial.
Yeah, and I think that's okay. I think the impact can be big and beyond, and you may not touch it right now, right? You're gonna
Right.
touch the deliverables, right? Yeah, that's the piece that, we hand over, and probably some outcomes we can measure those. But beyond that, maybe.
Yeah, I think the smaller impacts would be the ability of the organizations that I'm working with to come up with directed educational materials or activities.
Yeah, definitely. Okay.
Can I just try real quick?
Go
I
ahead.
had to move out, or maybe I can stay, but I have to mentally move out. I think if we have this channel built, eventually, I think hopefully, because we can fix some of the problems not helping. But I think eventually, hopefully, we can. They use all resources, all talent we have. It is my hope that eventually we can help them maybe attract more residents or attract businesses because of the availability we are having, and eventually maybe the Eastern Carolina will have like improved the profile in terms of financial and where they are. That's really the bigger picture. But yeah, some of the things like I think they have access to this ECU talent and skills. I think that's a community long-term outcome eventually, and it certainly help the university also because the faculty and students get an opportunity to work with the community engagement and stuff. Yeah, that's what I feel. But going backwards, then there's a lot of things really it's hard to figure out. But I think this is a good exercise. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you figure out pieces like I have a study that I'm doing, and so I thought, well, I'm just going to put it in here, and I figure these pieces. I'm like, that's missing. There's a piece missing between how I want to get here and there. And so, how do you make that
I think
work?
eventually I'm gonna have multiple people to look at, including some of this. Like this is a great group. I think I'll probably eventually ask everybody's input, and I'm trying to connect with people just to took the purple and the gold bars that this last week. I think there are interested there. Like I'm having some ideas of how to get help. I think eventually, my brain engineer does not really work on this one, but I think if we can gather some ideas, I think yeah. Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll just move away for now.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll try my best.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Anyone else want to share a piece of their model that they could really fill in or maybe struggled with? Or
Yeah, sure. I'll, well, so were we supposed to work backwards, you know? It
You can,
doesn't-
the article starts that way, but you can do the model in either direction.
Okay.
It's totally up to you.
So, after hearing some other people's responses, my broader impact, this is pretty broad, is thinking about creating a stronger sense of place for community members
Mhm.
in a specific community. But I started with some questions, the guiding questions was thinking about how integrating an inclusive design process can help create a stronger sense of place for community development projects. And then trying to think about drilling that down, because that's so broad, so thinking about how can a community development project encourage interaction and an activity between individuals, people coming together and doing things together, or people and place. How can it encourage social inclusion? So thinking about, and also thinking about how it can contribute to the cultural fabric of the community through narrative and messaging, which I'm kind of thinking about that, circling back to social inclusion potentially. So
Thinking
anyway,
about how
I did a
do
lot
you-
of question writing.
Thinking about how do you get to sense of place. I like this idea of the kind of cultural fabric and how that feeds into how we feel that we are a part of or a piece of the place. So those two definitely have some connection, relationship, I think, wherever they fall in the model. I keep saying, I don't know why I keep doing this, I'm thinking like impact over here versus,
Yeah.
you know.
Wax on, wax off.
Yeah, exactly. Where it's come from. But yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so here's what we have. We have half an hour left. I think the best way to do that, I have two PowerPoints, keep going on one. I want to come back to this. This is how I want us to spend our last half an hour. Talking, sharing with each other. Now, if you didn't bring your protocol, and I know a lot of you are struggling at this point with your protocol because you don't have a method yet because your study isn't fully defined or described, and that's okay. But where you are in the process of identifying your question, thinking about how are you going to collect data to answer that question, wherever you are in that process, we're going to partner up and share that. So if it's in a paper format, that's great. If it's talking about where I am and here are my thoughts, and then the other partner has questions for you, I still think that's all a very helpful exercise, even if it isn't specifically spelled out and developed yet. So we're going to do that. So that I would just like to finish the housekeeping thing so that way I don't have to interrupt again, and then we can kind of finish organically. So for April, as far as IRB and protocol development, the last really portion you have is that blue portion. So if you'll take a look at it. Now, if you figure out what your project is, and you go back and you edit the yellow and you're really working on the green at that point, great, send me those. I'll take those if that's where you are in the process. So again, just to let you know, in terms, when Beth did this before, the protocol was given out in April. No one ever saw a protocol or knew they needed to do that until April, and then they drafted it all out, and then they kind of picked up in May. So Sharon and I had a conversation about breaking it up into pieces. So for those of you who are developing your study and it's a good fit for and it matches for you, that's great. You can do it in pieces. For those of you who aren't that far along in your project development, that's okay. But we got to get there so that way in May, where projects are defined and described, and we are talking about methods. So we do have to get there. But anyway, so it was done that way, knowing that it wouldn't be a fit for everyone, and that's okay if you're not there. Anyway, I still think it'd be a good idea for you to invite your community partner to our April meeting if you feel like that would be beneficial. If you don't think that's beneficial, that's okay. But at that meeting, we're going to have some groups set up. And so you'll be going to materials management, you'll have IRB, Cassie will talk to you about your budget and things like gift cards. What are the gift card regulations? Who can you give them to and who can't, and that kind of thing. So if you think it would be beneficial for your partner to hear some of those pieces, then we'd love to have them. But if you'll just let me know who is coming and if they're coming, so we can make sure that we have name tags and, you know, all those things. And then there's just a reminder from February that MOP is due in May, so that memorandum of partnership. And again, if you're developing your study and your partnership, those are things you can be doing as you're doing that work, as you're having those meetings. Your readings for April are all in the binder. I can post them on Blackboard for you as well. Everything from this session is on Blackboard, so if you want to read any of those other pieces, or if you want to look at the logic model again, there's a great article up there for that as well. So those are the housekeeping pieces. Can I answer any questions about April? Are there any questions that I need to get answers for?
I have on my calendar April 12th, Friday, April 12th at 1 o'clock.
That's right.
Yeah, that's what I have.
Is that right? Yep.
I hope you didn't already say this.
Mhm.
but I'm
That's
sorry.
okay.
For the partners coming in, would they stay at 1 to 4:30 also?
Probably not. I don't know that we'll need that much time. But I think it'd probably be safe to say like from maybe 1 to 3.
Okay.
I think so, because that would give you ample time to get through those kind of working sessions, I think, those groups.
Okay.
And then we'll take a amount of time afterwards for you to kind of process that information and kind of work. So it really is more of a working session than a content delivery kind of
Okay.
session.
That's basically what I was
Yeah.
asking. is
Yeah.
That if they're here, that, yeah.
Yes.
They're working.
So we'll build it, so it'll be time for those rotations, for you to have information like with Jason and that kind of thing, but then also taking time to sit and work on your project, your protocol, your whatever it is, however you kind of need to use that time. So those are the main pieces of that. So let's see what else is here. Yep.
I think Sharon sent out an invite related to that August thing.
Mm-hmm.
And somewhere I'm having a memory that we get 3 minutes
Mm-hmm.
to tell people about our project. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. So here's what happens at that.
I
So
mean, I'm-
for our August meeting,
Mm-hmm.
you will be at the Croatan. The honors college students will be there, the students that will be assigned to your project. And you will have 3 minutes to tell them what your project is about. And then afterwards, they will circulate to you. And then there's ample time for you to answer questions or talk more about your project or
Okay,
whatever.
because I was thinking, I don't know how you're going to recruit folks in 3 minutes.
So it's
But
the
there's-
students, it's those 21 students that are enrolled in the class that you are.
So there's a 3-minute quick, I'm interested in mental health, I'm doing this at a middle school, and then they would come after to ask more questions.
Yes, right.
So there's more time than 3 minutes.
Yes.
That's what I'm getting.
That's exactly right. Yeah, so we find that the students, if we give the students the ability to tell us which projects they're most interested in, generally they have greater satisfaction with the projects and they're a bit more, they buy in a little more. So we like for you all to tell them, this is what my project is, and then we have ice cream. And then you eat ice cream and they all come around and talk to you and say, oh, tell me about your project, I'm so interested, this is whatever. And
We could bring snacks.
yeah, so we used to call it an ice cream social, but then for some reason people thought it was like optional. It's not. It's our session, but that's what we'll be doing during our August meeting. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Yeah. So there's ice cream.
Ice cream social is too casual.
It was way too casual. So it is our August session, but we just have no ice cream.
Can we bring snacks next week?
You can bring
Okay.
food whenever you want to.
I mean, next month, April, yeah.
Yeah. You can bring
See,
food.
my blood sugar's really low.
Oh, yeah, you should always feel free to bring lunch or
I mean,
snack
I'll bring
or
snacks for
whatever.
everybody, not just for me.
Oh, sure things.